With the release of Volume 30 of ReZero, it means that the web novel should be resuming pretty soon. And with that, I wanted to talk about a very interesting aspect of Ram that many people do not know. Most of us will remember that Ram was the person during Arc 2 that would actually teach Subaru how to read and write the language of Lagunica. However, what many people don't know is that there was a side story during this time where Subaru and Ram had a competition. This side story, titled Ram and the Night Study Group, features Subaru and Ram essentially teaching each other their respective languages. So Ram is teaching Subaru the language of Lagunica, and of course Subaru is teaching Ram Japanese hiragana. Now, as you can imagine with Ram's sort of attitude, she doesn't really take this disrespect by Subaru, and she essentially makes a wager on whether or not who could learn more the fastest, and they would essentially quiz each other at the end of it. As you can imagine, Ram does eventually win, beating Subaru out, and Subaru of course is upset that Ram won. However, as Ram leaves the room and she walks away from Subaru's room, she says something which is extremely ominous and hasn't really been mentioned since this time. And by the way, this side story was released all the way back in 2014, so way before season 1 of the anime, by the way. When Ram leaves the room, what she says is that she feels like she's seen Japanese hiragana before. And that is pretty much it. This detail, as far as I remember, hasn't ever been brought up before, which leaves the question, where did Ram see Japanese before? Now, I know what most of you are going to say. Well, it cannot be Subaru because this is the first time Ram met Subaru, so she couldn't have learned Japanese from him. Some of you might say, what about Aldebaran? Well, we do know that Al is aware of who Ram is, and the only issue is that Ram doesn't seem to recognize him, although he does wear a helmet. However, we do know that when Ram was a child, when her village was destroyed, Aldebaran was on the gladiator island of Gunnenhive, so he couldn't have met Ram when she was a child, and after her village burned down, of course she went under the guise of Roswell's Manor, so it doesn't seem like there's a period where Al and Ram could actually meet. Of course, after Aldebaran escaped, he then shortly came into contact with Priscilla at the tournament and then became Priscilla's knight. So it does seem unlikely that it could have been Aldebaran, but of course, as stated before, Aldebaran does seem to know Ram. So do keep that in mind. It's just that the timelines don't really match up. Of course, the third person could be Flugel, but Flugel has been dead for 400 years, so it cannot have been him. However, I have a potential solution for this, and this comes from Arc 5's Pre-Stellar Reconstruction Journal. For those that don't know, after the events of Arc 5, Garfiel, Liliano, Ricardo Welkin, Clone, Ezokadna go into Typhon's tomb, and what they find is that it's littered with Japanese writing, and this is something that Garfiel points out. After all, Garfiel has lived with Subaru for quite a long time by this point and has seen Subaru's Japanese writing, and Garfiel states that the writing is very similar to Subaru's hometown's writing. I will point out one more thing that I want you to think about, and that is the fact that in Greed If, Echidna states that the Oni tribe were created with the ability to smell the witch's scent. So the Oni tribe were created. Put that with quotation marks. That's what Echidna says. So maybe the reason why Ram sort of is familiar with Japanese writing is because maybe Echidna, Flugel, and other people were sort of behind the Oni clan's creation, and as a result maybe there is Japanese writing by the Oni village, or maybe Ram stumbled across a witch's tomb and saw Japanese writing similar to what was in Typhon's trial. So I'm not sure, that's just some speculation which will separate Ram from Aldebaran, but either way, in Arc 7, Ram and Al are in the same sort of location, so I do believe they will eventually meet anyway.